Rao is the moderator for this session. Sanath Rao is Director of Corporate Development in Intel with specific focus on smartphones and tablets in emerging markets. He does M&A for Intel in mobile space. He's also M&A advisor to iSpirit. Yeah, over to Sanath Rao.
This is on. Hi guys, welcome to the How to Exit Successfully panel. There's still some social networking going on. Ravi? No, we'd love for you guys to say. Okay, so we'll go and get started. So welcome to the How to Exit Successfully panel. If you guys are like me, right, you wake up in the morning, get your cup of coffee, and you go to TechCrunch, right? And invariably, the first or the second line is so-and-so company bought so-and-so other company. Right? Google bought Waze, Salesforce acquired ExactTarget, right? Yahoo has done a bunch of acqui-hires. Closer to home, Naspers acquired Redbus, Autodesk bought Context, right? There were 131 acquisitions in just the last quarter alone. So roughly one every day. It's pretty amazing. I'm sure as an entrepreneur you're wondering, what does this mean for me? Right? How do I participate in an acquisition? How does a big company decide about acquisitions? Right? What process do they follow, etc. So we have a star panel here today. Right? Next to me I have Ashish Kashyap. So Ashish is a celebrity in India. He is the CEO of the Ibibo group, and he was the one who drove the Redbus acquisition. We'll talk about that. Next we have Joydeep Bose. Joydeep is the head of M&A and investment and strategy at a small company down the street called Cisco. Okay. So welcome, Joydeep. And we have Upal Basu, who's flown down from Palo Alto to be with us. Upal is a partner at Nokia General Partners, and he was also an entrepreneur. So he's going to give us the entrepreneur perspective. So good, so we're going to go and get started. Ashish, I'm going to start with you. Redbus, right? It's the story on everyone's mind. Walk us through the process, right? Why Redbus? Why did you guys pick Redbus? What was the thought process there?
I think because the bus was red. No, that was a joke. But essentially, I mean, the whole motivation was we already had a very fast growing, or we already have a very fast growing B2C online travel aggregator business, which is called goibibo.com. It essentially retails, or it enables people to buy everything from air to hotels to car rental. What we saw was that the bus vertical on that platform started to show amazing growth on the back of Redbus. We actually integrated our APIs with Redbus, and we saw that that piece is growing, and that's very, very unique to our market vis-a-vis any other international market, where the concept of short haul and mid haul kind of travel on buses is not that prevalent, where there are fragmented set of suppliers. And that's where we realized that this is one vertical which we either need to build very aggressively, or we need to look at partnering in a more intimate manner with a player like Redbus. So we got talking to Redbus, and we realized that one of the things that we learned was that the business is not just about the buy side equation, but also has solved a lot of sell side problems, which means enables tens of thousands of bus operators to get enabled on the internet, to help manage its accounting issues, ERPs, inventory management, yield management. And that's where we said that we need to go for it, because this was the time, and this is the window available where not too many people in the market are looking at this sector. It was like it was not in the center. It was not like normal product e-commerce where there are thousands of companies and everybody's looking at it. So we went for the sprint, and we did the acquisition in a short span of start to end 3 months. I think one point I want to say is this, that what helped was that there was a arm's length partnership. So that helped the relationship to get built, and I feel that relationship building is a very important piece in any of this transaction. Then the other key piece is what we liked was that the team is excellent, very, very grounded, has built this whole regional presence across the nation with every small, medium and large bus operator. I think that was a a big plus. And finally, what was really exciting, besides of course we all know that it's a really trusted brand, and that attribute, that intangible attribute, is not replicable easily or not buildable easily. But besides that, what we saw was that online bus market is only 10%, and which makes it a huge headroom for growth, unlike air, which is almost 27 or 28%. So that was our story, and we continue to remain super excited. And we believe that the combination of our OTA, B2C OTA business, GoIVivo, and Red Bus, today's date, in terms of volume of travelers that we touch on a daily basis, makes us the biggest travel group in the country.
So Ashish, were you guys the only people talking to Red Bus, or were you competing with 4 or 5 other companies for the acquisition?
Look, I mean, what I understand, right, because I was on the other side of the table that time. So as a person on the other side of the table, there were many suitors, because remember, in the consumer internet space in this country, one of the things, in fact, we should perhaps talk about is there enough of you guys in this room building consumer products, consumer internet products, solving local problems? So coming back to your question, in India actually at that scale, I mean, if you look at Red Bus, it is, after railways, it is one of the biggest travel transaction system. Okay, so with such few supply of great assets, obviously the buyers of that asset or the investors in that asset would be queuing up, right? So there were many players. I think what worked in our favor was the fact that there were A, synergies clearly on the strategic side, B, we really ran fast.
And Ashish, so one last thing on the Red Bus acquisition. So who was the final decision maker? Who decides these things in a company like Naspers?
Yeah, so I mean, in this case, it's iBevo Group which acquired. Okay, Naspers is my principal, who of course sponsors, right? So typically, I need to make the case to my investment, my board, and then they say yes or no. But at the end of the day, it's my life on fire if this asset doesn't work. So you need to have the courage of the conviction to say that you believe in the Indian market, A, you believe in a long-term story, because I don't think any internet business you can, there's a magic wand to build something in 3 or 4 years. So that's how it typically worked.
Great, sounds like a fantastic acquisition, and all of us are looking forward to future growth. Great, so I'm going to move on to Joydeep. So Joydeep, Cisco is very active in the M&A space, right? Cisco is well known. Tell us, how does a big company think about M&A? Right? What triggers the need for an acquisition from a big US company?
Before I start, I just want to say that acquisition is a very serious business. And typically, there is an acquisition committee on every company's board. And as Ashish said, that somebody's neck will be on the hook for a long time. And I can share that with you very well, because when you do an acquisition, not only what are the commitments given, a measure of the time of purchasing the equity of the company, but also on a periodic basis even after thereafter. Coming back to Cisco, as you rightly said, Sanath, I think we have been very active. I think, I don't know the last count, and some of my colleagues who are sitting on the audience can confirm, but I think we have done about 171 acquisitions so far in the life cycle of the company. Some of them fairly big ones. Our acquisition strategy is actually driven from 2 different approaches. One approach is that every product or architecture, as we call them, once we start developing the strategy for that, we kind of divide that activity into 3 parts. One is, and together they're called build, buy, partner. So everything that we try to develop for a market, we kind of take a very conscientious approach to say, what can we buy to integrate to save time and time to market? Or what is the best technology that we can capture from the market? So as I was saying, that when you actually start developing that strategy, you kind of become very clear in terms of what will give us the leg up and a strategic advantage, and integrating different parts that you could potentially from the ecosystem. The other approach, which is done in lesser volume, is that because the investment of the acquisition team is the same team within Cisco, not necessarily in all companies, we typically take a cycle of fostering innovation, capturing innovation for the business unit, and what we call the harvest of innovation. So the first one that I talked about, where we actually have a build by partner, you can think about that as an inside out strategy, saying what do I need and where do I look for that? Whereas the second approach, which is the foster, capture, and the harvest, is an outside in, saying that I came across a fantastic technology in the market, I'm going to make some minority investment. A business unit gets interested in that, integrates that into their roadmap, and over a period of time become so critical that we have an option to go and acquire that. So those are the two approaches that we look at typically in those investments.
So Joydeep, tell us, how do you identify potential acquisition candidates? Does your team go out and scout for candidates, or does the business unit bring them?
It's both. There is no percentage of portfolio distribution here, but typically what we have seen is that there are three big criteria that an acquisition makes either a successful acquisition or a disastrous acquisition. One of them is that, which is kind of the obvious one, how defendable is the technology from an entry barrier point of view. The second is how important it is from a financial criteria in terms of gross margin, because as you know, that if a company or a product is not the number one or number two leading, provides a leading position in the market, companies like Cisco will not probably get into that market. And the third one is very important, is a cultural fit between the entrepreneur team and the CEO and Cisco's business and Cisco's philosophy of culture. So from that point of view, most of the successful acquisition typically starts with the BUs identifying a partner who they start working with much before an acquisition decision or even an idea of an acquisition is made. But having said that, it is also not unlikely that we have seen in recent times where we are given a broad definition of what might be the next big thing for Cisco to get into, in which time the M&A and the strategy team kind of scouts around the market and profiles companies. But there is a collaboration between the business unit and the corp dev team going on a continuous basis.
Great. So it sounds like the three criteria for an acquisition: strategic fit, financial viability, and then cultural fit.
Absolutely.
Right? Great. Thanks. Good. So Upal, we'll move on to you. So before you joined Nokia General Partners, you were a successful entrepreneur. So why don't you tell us about M&A from an entrepreneur's perspective, right? What does this mean? How does it work? What were your experiences?
Thanks. So I was an entrepreneur for over 8 years, and last 5 years I've been a venture capitalist with Nokia Growth Partners. Just to give you some context, the reason I want to speak from an entrepreneur's perspective is I really think M&A is a very rare event, and from a percentage likelihood, IPOs are extremely rare, but M&A is itself also something which happens very rarely, and often entrepreneurs, when they get that opportunity, they often miss that exit opportunity. And one of the fundamental differences, and people don't fully appreciate, is the standard laws of economics of supply and demand do not apply to buying and selling companies. So if you have a kilo of onions you want to sell, if you drop the price at a certain point, someone's going to buy it. If you're trying to sell your house, if you drop the price at a certain point, you could have multiple bidders. But you have the wrong company at the wrong time, you could sell it for $0, there'll be no buyer. So I'm going to make this real. If you have an on-premise technology company in CRM, you might as well give up any chance of anyone ever buying that company. It doesn't matter if you have $20 million in revenue. The real thing is you have to be at the right time in the market with the right technology which the buyer wants to buy. So let me make this a bit real. So Joydeep and I were on the board of a company called NetMagic, which NTT acquired. We were indirectly invested in Waze, which Google acquired. As you know, Nokia's handset business just got acquired by Microsoft. So what triggered these acquisitions, and what can entrepreneurs learn from that? So the fundamental thing which makes people buy a company is scarcity and value. Your technology, your company has to be valuable and it has to be scarce. And I use those two words very deliberately. If you're not scarce, I can get a reverse auction going and buy your competitor at a fraction of the price at which you'd like to be sold. I could OEM and resell your technology and never have to buy your company at all anyway. The reason which triggers an M&A is fundamentally boils down to the same fundamental things which drive human behavior. It's often greed and fear. Fear that your competitor might get that asset and leapfrog you. So you could argue that the reason Waze was acquired was not because Google really needed Waze, but there was a concern that Waze would have been acquired by Apple, which is struggling to get into the mapping industry. You could use the same logic with Microsoft. Why did Microsoft acquire Nokia's handset assets? The reality is, Microsoft right now does not have a leading position in handsets. How many other companies out there which are present in 200 countries can Microsoft actually acquire, which would get them to be able to compete against Google? And the reason I bring these as real example is, if you consider that the chance of you getting acquired is low, you need to, from the day one, when you're writing your business plan, you need to try to build a company which is distinctive. Distinctive means it's scarce. There's no other company quite like you. And B, that you know where the value is shifting in your industry. So if you consider those 2 points, and using NetMagic as a real example, which by the way Joydeep and I looked at, and we were on the board of, NetMagic was around for 7-8 years. Why was NetMagic acquired by NTT from Japan? NetMagic was an Indian company. And the reason is quite simple. Sharat Sanghi, who's a wonderful CEO and founder, he built this company over 8 years. For an acquirer to replicate that would have been impossible. It's a regulated industry. Data centers fall under a highly regulated act within the Indian government rules and regulations. So for any company to enter the data center industry, they would not be able to replicate that company. And the reality was, for what that company was doing, they were the only company which was an operator-independent, cloud-centric technology company. There was no one else quite like them. So what happened because of that? It triggered a massive auction, in which this company was acquired at a very high multiple. So I think this gives an example of why sometimes people wonder, why did Instagram get acquired for $1 billion? Why was Waze acquired for $1 billion? Why is this pricing so irrational? I think it comes back to really the fundamental issue, scarcity and value. It is not about your trailing 12-month revenues. It's not about your EBITDA. It's really about how important is it for the buyer to own that company? Because if they don't own Redbus, what is the impact on, for example, IBIBO's business if, say, MakeMyTrip to own that asset instead? And that tends to trigger valuations which are not often apparent to an entrepreneur. So my takeaway here for entrepreneurs really is, think about this as part of your core business development plan, and think about how you're going to create scarcity over the longer term.
Right. So valuation is a function of scarcity and greed, scarcity and value.
Oh, I would say value to the buyer, and also the opportunity cost of losing that value to somebody else.
Great. Good. So let's move on. Now we've all heard the term acqui-hires, right? Where a small company gets acquired by a big company for their people. Supposedly Yahoo buys one company every week, or one company every 2 weeks for acqui-hires. So Ashish, tell us what are acqui-hires, right? Why do they happen? What are the criteria for acqui-hires?
So first let me talk about the motivation of the buying side, which is us. So typically when you are, as a company, in your journey building, there are 2 ways of, how do you build that? You build by hiring great talent. So there are 2 ways, right? You could hire talent, which are professionals. The other is you hire people who have seen failures, people who have struggled, people who have built things in a frugal manner. So the formula that works for us, I'm sure it works for many companies, but at least I can speak for myself, during my 5 years of building multiple businesses, is when we actually get those people who have tasted failures, not successes. People who have tried, but because of wrong timing, etc., they have they've fallen. And that's really the motivation for us when we actually acquire the whole team, lock, stock and barrel. And we do that very often. We obviously don't announce it. And that formula for us has helped us build various businesses that you see in my portfolio.
So you bring up a very good point. You've done a lot of acqui-hires, right? But everyone, when they think of the IBIBO group and they think of Ashish, they think of Redbus, right? What's the reason, why don't acqui-hires get announced? Why are they?
Yeah, because many a times it is acqui-hire and it is not an acquisition of an organization, because acquisition of an organization means, from a pure process point of view, everybody here would understand, it's a long, lengthy process, long, lengthy legal process. So on the other hand, if we have to get things done within 48 hours or, or 3 days, the best is to hire the whole company, the whole team, and buy the technology rather than buying the company. And that's why we don't see it a reason enough to announce, one. And second, maybe the stage of life cycle of that particular company or that particular team is very, very early for us to, we feel it doesn't make sense. And I think in general, stealth mode helps.
If I may just add something. So I think different people call this differently in the industry. Tech and talent, technology and talent is probably another packaging of active hire. Typically what happens is these are very important acquisitions in my opinion, and especially for technology companies. Because like Ashish said, how are you going to shrink the time to market by able to integrate something that already exists as an intellectual capital in people's mind, either as a process or algorithm or whatever that is. The other part which is very important is the fact that these days you will see not like previously, a lot of asset purchases where you are going to a company and saying that I really don't want to buy the entire 100% equity of the company and your assets and liabilities, but I want to buy a piece of technology with some people. And that has become very active across the globe.
So Joydeep, since you talked about asset purchases, tell us what happens when a big company buys a smaller company? What happens during an acquisition? What happens to the employees? Do they all get fired? Do they get bonuses?
This is such an important question because a lot of companies that I have seen and I have worked with before, I've seen that they have made great acquisitions, but they have not been able to integrate. So integration is a very, very important function in every acquisitions life cycle. And the good companies which have been able to acquire and integrate well and monetize the asset or the company that have acquired very well have started thinking about an integration strategy from day 0 or maybe day -5. And what typically happens in that case is, like I said, who are these people who are coming in, and manpower planning and human resources integration is probably the most sensitive thing, because you have acquired a great product line and 200 people, and you don't have people who are motivated to stay on and contribute to the product. What good use will that be? So integration is important. From our point of view specifically, we see that our sales force is not motivated unless that product is quickly on the price list, which they can sell and get their incentive. These are human behavior, human nature. You cannot undo them. So therefore, integration for every company who has been successful in acquiring and integrating and monetizing assets or other companies well, integration is a very, very important function. And you come from Intel, there's a good integration team. Cisco, I think all big companies who have been successful acquiring other companies have put an excellent focus on the integration process. And coming back to the Ashish's first point, saying that whose neck is, or whose backside is on the fire, we have a process, and many companies have a process where you have to go back and to the acquisition committee and on the board and say how the performance of the acquisition has been benchmarked against what has been said at the time of acquisition as a part of the proposal and the valuation. So nobody's off the hook for a long time.
Yeah, and I know that within Intel, when we do an acquisition, we tend to keep the acquired company comes in, but they tend to be a separate business unit for at least a year, so that it's a gradual move in.
It's a very hard process, I can tell you. I mean, I can't even get into that.
Great. So Upal, let's talk a little bit about the entrepreneurs in the room. Right? Mm-hmm. What should they do if a company comes calling? Right? Somebody comes and says, hey, you know what, I want to come acquire you. I like what you guys do. What's the first thing they should do?
So I would take that call. I would not hang up the phone. And I think this leads to a point I wanted to make is, historically, if you look at the history of technology, the S-curve of our industry was 5 to 10 years long. If you started a company, it peaked at 5 or 6 years, and then you could harvest it for many years. The rapid change of what cloud computing has done and internet has done is obsolescence has become very quick. What you think is hot right now may be obsolete in 3 years. Snapchat is hot today. In 3 years from now, I can assure you right now someone in the valley is trying to disrupt Snapchat. And Snapchat is one of the hottest companies right now. So the reality is, what is interesting and acquirable today may not be even interesting to the same buyer a year from now. Cisco may be interested in a technology company today, but if that company chose not to sell to Cisco, a year later if they call Cisco, I can assure you Cisco probably has moved on. And this happens all the time in our industry. The entrepreneur gets a $100 million opportunity, he says, no, I'm really worth 300. 2 years later he realizes he's not much more than $100 million. He goes back to the same buyer. The buyer has moved on to a different project. So take that call. The key to create an auction-like environment is to always be mindful who your natural buyers are. So when someone calls you, you need to seek the help of trusted advisors to tell you, is this the time to get out or not? And often what happens is, us VCs and us company executives, we all suffer from the same groupthink. As an entrepreneur, you have been programmed and for the right reasons to believe that you are number one and you will remain number one. But the reality is the world outside is a very different place. So whenever some situation arises, whether it's a talent acquisition hire or a strategic acquisition opportunity, take a deep breath, take the call, be very friendly to the potential buyer, and really have a discussion with people you trust who are really objective and ask the question, is this the time to get out or should we stay on?
So when a big company comes calling, take the call, right? Very important.
If one of these folks call you, take the call. And then call me and ask me, should I sell it at that price?
Great. So I think we are out of time, right? So I'd like to thank all of you guys and thank the panel. And we will be available after this. Okay, we have time for one question. One question. Yeah.
Is there something like building a company from the ground up and preparing it for an exit? If I'm an entrepreneur starting an early stage company today, working with technology that I know for a fact will become obsolete in the next couple of years, what's my best way of building this company out over the next couple of years? I'm not going to have enough revenues in a few months or a year's time to be able to justify someone buying into that revenue stream. I'm going to be selling them the potential growth over the next couple of years. But when I know that the technology itself will become obsolete in the next couple of years, what sort of some suggestions that the panel might have?
So the point I was trying to make was most entrepreneurs do not realize their technology will become obsolete in 2 years. That's part of being an entrepreneur. You're supposed to have your blinders on. If you thought your technology is going to be obsolete in 2 years, frankly, you shouldn't be starting that company. The reality is people will buy you because in 2 years from now, because they think they can create value from your technology over the next 5 years. Yeah. So that's why I advise entrepreneurs to think really carefully about the opportunity cost of becoming an entrepreneur, but really try to think in the mindset not just about who you are, but who the buyer could be. And one of the things I highly recommend entrepreneurs do is they do biz dev. They should spend enormous time doing biz dev and relationship building. Let large companies know what you're doing, right? Entrepreneurs often get lost in selling only to the customers and often don't pay attention to the large companies who can potentially acquire them. Have a person who focuses on BD. You'd be surprised at what time suddenly an opportunity arises for you. So,
yeah, just one point. I mean, agree with whatever you say, but you know, because I build businesses also. I think first phase is for you to just say, what problem are you going to solve? You can't really worry about anything else. You can't worry about your buyer. The first phase, right? I mean, yes, maybe second phase. If you start worrying about start dressing up the bride to get it sold to, let's say, a potential eBay, there are chances, but that's going to be just a stroke of luck. So my suggestion to everyone here would be, ask a very difficult question. What problem are you solving? Are you executing it better, even if it's not a disruption? Or is it a new market that you're creating?
So I think we are out of time, guys. Thank you very much. And we'll be outside the room if you guys have